I teach in Long Island City, Queens, at a public school. The school that I work at is a high school for new immigrants to the United States. So all of the students that attend my school have never attended another school in the U.S. They're all brand new immigrants, and they're all English language learners. And I would say the number one thing that keeps me going and that inspires me at my school is my students themselves. They have tremendous stories. They're really inspiring people. They've gone through really difficult hardships in many cases. They've grown mature beyond their years. They have lots of responsibility for their families sometimes, responsibilities that teenagers often don't have, and in spite of that, they have a really strong desire to learn. So unlike some other public schools, or the image you might have in your mind of what a public high school looks like, we really don't have a lot of students that are checked out. I mean, there's always some, but it's not really the mode at our school. So, you know, their enthusiasm, their desire to improve, their motivation to learn English is really inspiring, and I feel very privileged to work with them. But as Barry O'Connell mentioned, we also have a great community of teachers there, and so I know that sometimes if I'm not reaching a student, another teacher may be reaching them. We have teachers who are bilingual. I mean, I'm bilingual. I speak Spanish, but there are teachers who teach bilingual classes, so the students who don't have enough English to do well in my class may be doing very well in their Spanish bilingual class or their Chinese bilingual class. We also have, you know, I mean, there are always problems with the administration, but I feel that we have an administration that's fairly supportive, and the principal and the assistant principals. I think that there's a fair amount of trust in the teacher's ability to teach, and so I feel that with my education from Amherst, I can really use what I've learned here to come up with creative ideas, to plan my lessons, to find solutions to problems without having to deal with a prescribed lesson format or something that is being imposed upon me. And so if I think that, you know, that a certain kind of game is going to really help the students engage better than, you know, a reading activity, I can do that. Nobody's going to come into my classroom and tell me, this is not what you should be doing right now. In terms of challenges, you know, for me, I think the biggest challenge to my teaching, or the biggest frustration, is not really so much about what's going on in my school itself, but what's going on in New York City and in the country in terms of education. In spite of the fact that all of the students at our school are English language learners, they're held to the same standards as students that are born in the United States, and so they have to pass the same state exam to graduate from high school that a student who has lived their whole life in the U.S. has to pass, and that exam is extremely challenging for our students. We have, and many of our students pass anyhow, and many of them do well, but there is always a number that don't pass and repeat it, and I think that giving that message to students who are working so hard that they're failures because the test is not really designed for them is just a terrible thing, and it's also a terrible thing for our school because we receive low ratings as a result of our students' performance when our students are really high-achieving students that just need more time to learn English. So that's a frustration, and because of that test, there's always you know, a large percentage of test preparation that's going on during the school day, even if I know that that's not the best way to teach them, and I know that that's not what they need to really thrive. There's little that I can do if I know that without that test they're not going to be able to graduate from high school. I mean, I just feel that I can't deprive them of their opportunity to graduate from high school because I know that teaching them in a different style, you know, or teaching them different material is more appropriate for them.
I'm going to go to Dale next, but first of all, he and I share actually two things, one of which he doesn't know about. I thought until he spoke at lunch today that I had the lowest math score in my SAT in the history of the test, but he implied that his might be lower. We haven't actually exchanged the detailed information. And the other part is that we both have a very, very cherished, and I would, even though she was my student, I would call her my mentor here. So, Dale, if you'd go ahead.
And the mentor he's speaking of is Helen von Schmidt. So if anybody has an opportunity to take one of her classes and want to learn something about yourself, I'd suggest taking her class. She's awesome. Let's see, right now I'm teaching in Los Angeles. I teach at a high school downtown Los Angeles, about 10 blocks from Staples Center where the Lakers play. I have a class of autistic kids, mostly ninth graders. I think the thing that I love about teaching the most is also the thing that frustrates me the most. The thing I love the most is because my kids are in special education, the administration doesn't particularly, they don't hold me accountable for things that the students learn within the class, because the students' scores aren't counted within like the annual yearly progress, so their scores don't matter. So they really, as long as the classroom isn't on fire, they really don't pay much attention to what's going on in my classroom. Now, I love that because it gives me the opportunity to do whatever I feel like I want to do with my students. We do a lot of like life enriching things in the classroom. We take a lot of field trips, like I've taught Romeo and Juliet. We're working on like Roman myths and everything, but the way I can deliver the instruction is however I want, because the administration doesn't hold me accountable for it. So like we went on a field trip once, and I found that I have a student who he's 14 years old, and I still had to work on helping cross the street correctly. At the beginning when I started teaching the class in November. But then I found that this kid is he's phenomenal at video games, and so I'm like, okay, so if he's phenomenal at video games, but he has these mentally retarded tendencies, all right, so why don't we try to deliver instruction through learning situations through video games? I've done lessons, reading lessons. We've just using Skype. We connected with another class, and so my students will read Dr. Seuss to a third or fourth grade class in classroom in Virginia, and it was just something that somebody suggested. But the one thing that I realized as we were doing the activity, I was like, wait a minute, my students are trying really hard, because they want to impress these these younger students, so they're just completely sold on the activity, and they're really into it. So I love the fact that the administration, really has a hands-off kind of approach to my classroom, but it's also really frustrating because it also reflects that the administration has this perception that all right, because your scores aren't helping us out in school in terms of annual yearly progress, we're not really concerned with what your kids are doing. So it's just completely hands-off. And I know that the administration has the responsibility to, for the school to improve, but you want them to care about every single person, within the school. You don't just want them to care about the test takers. So, I love being able to deliver the instruction the way that I want to do it. I think that, in Amherst, education is really helpful for that, because, just be as creative as you like, and, and make it happen for your kids at whatever you want to teach. I wish I could be held, or I wish I was held a little bit more accountable, just to know that the administration showed more interest in what I was doing with
Martina?
I'll start with my frustration, which is somewhat related to yours, Dale, and actually also yours, Nicole. This focus currently in our country of test scores being high stakes. I don't really have a problem with children having to show what they know on a test, but connecting this funding of the school, or connecting a teacher's job or an administrator's job to these tests creates literally a conflict of interest. My job depends on my students scoring well, and at a certain point, if we increase the stakes, we're basically encouraging some ethically corrupt teachers to help their students score well. It's not my problem is not with testing, my problem is with the stakes attached to the testing. I teach a 4th grade class in the Bronx, and 4th grade, for those of you who aren't from New York City, 4th grade is like the testing grade. They start testing in 3rd all the way through 12th, but 4th grade and 8th grade scores are the ones that are published on the news, like the 4th grade scores went up, they went down. And my job at this point in the year is completely focused around test preparation, which is really not interesting to me or the children. So, it's up to me to make it interesting or fun, or at least get them sold on the idea that this is something important. But at the end of the day, I wish so badly that they didn't have to experience school in this way, like one cramming session after another. They should really love reading for reading, not because we love finding the main idea and finding the supporting details. Quite frankly, I never had to find the main idea of anything that I was reading. I don't really know what a main idea is, and I've been teaching main idea for 4 years. So, it just goes to show, is there a main idea? What is that? As opposed to a theme, which is apparently different than the main idea. Yes, I'm supposed to be teaching this, and I'm sitting there going, this is nonsense. The main idea is usually found in the first or last sentence of a paragraph, by the way. Or the title, for those of you who didn't know that, because everything is stated explicitly in the first and last sentence. It's completely absurd, and it doesn't prepare them for a real love of learning, which I fortunately had. So I guess I'm trying to get my students to love books the way that I love books, and fall in love with authors the way I did. And I have to tell you, Roald Dahl has helped me so much. His world is just as valid to them as it was to me when I was that age. So that brings me to the most rewarding parts of my job. I'm really, really vested in bringing arts and music and movement into my classroom. So I've gone to a teacher training program that focuses on the philosophy about Waldorf education. Briefly, that's just to basically look at the whole child as a holistic being and not just focus on the academic aspects, but also their physical, emotional, musical, creative development, which, we're all whole humans, and none of us, what I score on a test does not represent what I know necessarily. It's a sector of what I know, but it's not who I am. And so I think a great illustration of my what keeps me going is this year my students and I created a school garden. And I am from New York City. I'm not a gardener. I have a fire escape garden that consists of a pot of basil and a pot of tomatoes, and it dies every year. So I didn't really know what I was getting myself into, but I looked on the internet, I went to the farmer's market, I got 300 free tulip bulbs from the farmer's market. Thank you, farmer's market. And I read that I had to put them in before the frost, so we got out there we used the sporks from the cafeteria. I didn't have enough little trowels, and everybody wanted to get involved. So we're digging, and we planted them, and I didn't know what to expect. But 2 weeks ago, the tulips came up, and everybody is just, we're sitting out there writing poems about the tulips, and every class has come and visited our class and said, you guys are the ones who did this. And the way my students just sit up, and they're so proud, and they're like, yes, I planted those yellow ones over there. And, it's just such a wonderful feeling to let the children feel like I made my school better. And, that's just one little facet. When you see the light in their eyes, it's like whatever nonsense test prep we have to do, that little light is worth everything.